We had just gone through the Depression, and all families were rather poor. We were sort of privileged to be able to go to a public school and get an education. We didn't have much money, but we did have resources. We lived in an area where we could have a cow and chickens, and we had a big garden, and we ate good. My mother and dad provided for the family. They were big families. Our family was 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, and we had the smallest family on Norway Hill, I believe. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, I was 16 years old. The boys on Norway Hill had a little club called the Owls Club, and we were sitting at the Owls Club. We were listening to a football game on the radio. Of course, there wasn't TV then. And they broke into the game. Of course, Pearl Harbor being west of us, it was attacked at 8 o'clock in the morning. But when they broke into the game, it was like about 1 in the afternoon, and said Pearl Harbor was attacked. And of the 10 or 12 young men sitting there, I don't think anybody knew where Pearl Harbor was. But we knew it was serious. And the next day we went to school. The principal called everybody to the assembly to listen to Franklin Roosevelt, who gave a speech about the fact that war was being declared on Japan. You know, the whole thing that we would not be defeated. When young men got to be 18, they had to register for the draft. I myself was a junior in high school, and I knew that I was going to be drafted, so I and several of my classmates went and enlisted in the Navy. And when we enlisted in the Navy, my birthday was in January, I was 18. They said, we'll permit you to graduate from high school. We graduated in June 1943. So we graduated on June 4th, and June 5th, we were on a train going to the service next day. Took the Chippewa out of Iron Mountain. I thought we were going to go to Great Lakes, Illinois, but unbeknown to me, we were shipped to Farragut, Idaho for basic training. We were given tests, and those that showed certain interests were assigned to different schools. And I was assigned to fire control school. And I went to Treasure Island and San Francisco. Fire control deals with running a mechanical computer to put the guns on target. It has nothing to do with firing of guns. Gunners' mates load the guns. Fire controlmen put the gun on target. Well, you're never really adequately prepared because it's a learning process as you go from day to day, because it's impossible to cover all the incidents that you're going to run into. So when you get your assignment, then you start learning. You learn from the superiors and your shipmates who are in your crew. That's where the learning really begins. 3 of us were assigned to the USS Indianapolis: Paul Murphy, Paul Mitchell, and myself. Of course, all your clothes were in a sea bag. So you take your sea bag, and we went aboard the Indianapolis, and we were ready to be assigned billets, your bunk and everything. And well, we had to, there were just three of us who were assigned to the ship, so it didn't take the doctor long. He had to give a physical. It wasn't like he was going to examine the whole ship. There were just 3 of us that came from fire control school that were fire controlmen 3rd class. But every time you're transferred, you get a physical. So when I was assigned to USS Indianapolis, I got my physical. And the doctor said, well, you're probably okay to serve on Indianapolis, but I want you to go ashore and get an EKG of your heart. And when you get that, you can come back. So I went ashore to get the EKG, and the hospital I was at, there was either something wrong with the machine, there was some problem. And the technician said, well, Ed, you'll have to come back tomorrow. I'll give you a slip and you can get a room at the hotel and come back tomorrow. Well, I went back tomorrow and I got my EKG, and he said, well, you're fine, you can go back. So I went back, and my sea bag was on the dock and the ship was gone. Luckiest man in the world. So I went back and was reassigned to shore patrol duty in San Francisco. I went from San Diego to San Francisco. I was on shore patrol duty for about 3 days, and then I got assigned to the USS Lang. Station was the main battery director, which is about 30 feet from the surface of the water, the highest point on the ship. And the main battery director, of course, is where the ship receives data on the enemy. Spotting of planes, spotting of ships, you get the range, the distance of the ships, and so on. And my first shift was from 8 to 12 midnight. And of course, it was a good way to break in a new man. They call them pollywogs when they first go aboard ship. And they thought I was going to get seasick, but I turned the tables on them, didn't get seasick. And the Lang is a destroyer. It was built in 1939. It's a broken deck destroyer, what they call, because it has one stack, and amidship the deck goes down about 5 steps. So the fantail of the ship is not very high off the water. It had 4 5-inch guns, 4 40-millimeter guns, and several 50-millimeter guns, 8 torpedoes, and about 12 ash cans or depth charges. And the purpose of a destroyer is to escort larger ships. It's a man of war, and in escorting ships, we seek out submarines. It has sonar gear. Larger ships do not have sonar. That's why they have to have an escort. When we detect an enemy submarine, we drop ash cans. They are about 3 feet wide, and they look like an ash can, like a regular ash can. They're filled with dynamite or high explosive. There's a setting on the side, and if we detect a submarine to be 150 feet down, we set the ash can at 150 feet, and when the pressure of the water hits the mechanism on the side of the ash can, it explodes. We hope it blows holes in the side of the submarine, takes them out of action. The main purpose of a destroyer is to escort larger ships, and we spent most of our time escorting aircraft carriers. Whenever there was a submarine, of course, there was a lot of action because, of course, the submarine is trying to sink you. And that's always exciting. But one of the things that was not really connected with action was that we were in the tail end of a typhoon. Of course, even though the ship is 1,500 tons, which is rather small, when you compare that to the Indianapolis, which was 10,000 tons, you get in a typhoon and the ship begins to roll meaning rolling from side to side, pitch from front to back. And you get to the top of one of these swells, and then the ship comes crashing down and hits the bottom. And when you're up on top of the swell, it feels as though your feet are coming off of the deck, and when you go down to the bottom, your feet are going to go through the deck when you hit. And we rolled as much as 47 degrees. It was easier to walk on the walls than it was on the floor or on the deck. That's when you're rolling. And of course, a lot of the ships sunk in typhoons, a lot of the smaller ones, The larger ones have more weight and they have a bigger ballast, which holds them lower in the water. If you're high in the water, you're in danger. You have to be low in the water. One thing about a 18 or 19-year-old, you're invincible. And you don't think anything's going to happen to you. And it's a good thing. Because if you did, you'd be scared out of your wits, you'd never sleep. But the enemy makes it sort of miserable because planes attack at sunrise and at sunset because they're very hard to see. You know, when you're driving a car, you know how difficult it is to drive when the sun is in your eyes. So that's when they come in, at sunset, and also at sunrise in the morning. During the day, it's pretty quiet. In addition to escorting ships, we're in several battles because Japan, of course, had conquered all of the islands in the Pacific, and they were ready to invade Hawaii, but they never got that far. In order for us to defeat Japan, we had to take these islands back. So our troop ships that were escorted over there, we had battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, which would fire on the beach before they landed, and the planes, of course, would bombard the beach. The way that was worked out is if you had a piece of land, let's say that was a mile wide and let's say a half a mile deep, it was made out into squares, and each ship was assigned a square, and that's where you'd fire your shells. And the destroyers were always closest because they were the smallest. Behind them were the cruisers, behind them were the battleships. The one that I remember the best was in the Philippines, where MacArthur said, "I shall return." I happened to be very close to the landing craft that he was on when he waded ashore. But we bombarded Leyte for several days before our soldiers landed there and retook a part of the Philippine Islands. And one thing about the islands in the Pacific, they're coral. And it's not like sand. When you step in coral, you take a step and you look back to see where you stepped, your step is gone. The coral fills it right back in. So the soldiers have a hard time making progress on the islands, you know. But as they captured each one of these islands, of course, they were able to have planes stationed there, and we were able to put a lot of our supplies there, our fuel and different things. It was a sort of a stepping stone to getting the next one. And of course, the last one was Okinawa. Okinawa is about 400 miles south of Japan. And our ship played a very vital role there, as well as many of the ships. Japan was getting desperate near the end, and they turned to suicide planes and Baker bombs. A Baker bomb looks like a small aircraft. Its body is built like a torpedo, and it has a wingspan of about 12 feet, and is attached to the bottom of a Betty. A Betty is a twin-engine bomber, a Japanese bomber, and Japan had a lot of them. And they would attach these Baker bombs to the underside and fly until they detected our fleet. And then, of course, the Betty would come down a little ways and then release the Baker bomb. And the Baker bomb, of course, was a suicide. It was directed right toward a ship to blow up the ship or sink the ship. And, of course, in addition to that, they had suicide planes. A lot of their planes, the famous fighter plane of the Japanese in World War II was the Zero, and it had red balls on the wings representing the rising sun of Japan. So you could always detect whether they were enemy planes. Of course, you knew they were enemy planes from your radar. You had what they call IFF, identification, friend or foe, and you could identify whether a plane was enemy or friendly. The United States was going to invade Japan. There was no question about it, because Japan was going to fight to the last man. But before they could invade Japan, they had to have a large supply of men and material available to make the landing. And of course, Japan was going to pull all stops to prevent the United States from taking Okinawa. If you look at a map, you'll find that Okinawa is south of Japan, about 400 miles. The United States Navy in order to protect our transport ships and our supplies on Okinawa and our landing, had to create sort of an umbrella, half moon, of ships which would intercept all the aircraft and all the shipping that came from Japan toward Okinawa. And this was called a picket line. And on this picket line was made up of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Mainly destroyers, because they were the fastest and the most maneuverable. We were in that picket line for 89 days without securing our engines. That's 1 day less than 3 months. And every morning you would hear the horn on the ship to take battle stations, because every morning the suicide planes are coming. Our ship was very fast because it had aluminum superstructure, and it was like sit down in the water. It could go about 45 miles an hour. And I credit our captain with saving us, because he made an announcement that we're no good dead. So I'm going to do everything in our power to stay alive. So he said, when we're attacked, we're going to really zigzag, so just hang on. I'm opening this baby up to 45 miles an hour, and we're going to weave through the water. We're going to make a difficult target for anybody. And we never got hit. But other ships got hit, and of course, we'd pull up alongside of them, and most likely there were people blown off the ship in the water, and we'd have to pick them up. And I was sorry to say that a lot of them were seriously wounded and seriously burned, because what's bad about crashing into a ship, most likely they hit the storage of ammunition, where the powder and the shells are, and then that blows up. The men who are adjacent anywhere near, they get burned. And of course, as soon as we picked them up, we didn't have a doctor aboard ship. We had a pharmacist mate. And we'd transfer them to an aircraft carrier or a larger ship where there was a doctor. But at that time, the Japanese didn't have many surface ships left. If you read history, one of the biggest battles of the Pacific was the Battle of the Philippine Sea. And that's where Japan met up with our battleships and our cruisers and theirs. We won that battle because we had a lot of aircraft carriers, and the planes assisted, and the surface ships did a lot of bombarding of other ships, and the Japanese Navy was pretty all wiped out. But they had a lot of aircraft that could fly from Japan. On July 5th, I came to realize that there was a big cruiser right across the dock from us. I looked the second time, and it was USS Indianapolis. After not seeing them for 18 months, they were in the Pacific. They came back because they were hit on March 31st by a suicide plane. They had to come back and get repaired. There were 8 men that were killed, by the way, at that time on that ship. That USS Indianapolis had gone from Mare Island up to another area near San Francisco, and they didn't know what their mission was. But their mission was very secretive, and not even the captain knew what it was. But they loaded these large crates on the USS Indianapolis and said that they were to deliver this to Tinian Island as rapidly as they could. Well, it took them 10 days to go 5,000 miles. They were there in record time anyway for a cruiser, and they unloaded their cargo, and they didn't know what it was until the bomb was dropped. From Tinian Island, they went to Guam, and they were reassigned to have practice duty with some other ships in the Philippines, and they sent the cruiser from there to the Philippines to do their practicing. The Navy made a big blunder. They sent that Indianapolis without an escort, a destroyer which has sonar gear, can detect submarines. It went alone. And after it was out at sea, it was midnight, and a Japanese submarine detected them and shot 3 torpedoes into the midships of that USS Indianapolis. I didn't know what had happened because the newspaper did not publicize this very much because the war was over. And they were very jubilant because the war was over. Servicemen are expendable, and they didn't publicize it very much. Nobody knew about the sinking of the Indianapolis. But anyway, about 1970 or 80, I went to a reunion of the Indianapolis because I had these buddies on there, and I got tickets to the dinner, and I wanted to see Paul Murphy and find out exactly what happened. And he told me firsthand. He said I had the 8 to 12 watch. He said, and after the watch, it was very warm night. I went to sit on the fantail to cool off. And when you're on watch, you always are relieved 15 minutes early. So he said, I was relieved at 11:45. And he said, it was just about midnight. And he said, this terrific blast. And he said, the ship seemed to go right up in the air. He said, everything went dark. And he said, the first thing he thought of, he went down below deck and got Paul Mitchell. And he said, well, I think we better abandon ship. So he said, we abandoned ship. And one of the worst things was that when the ship was hit, it spilled all its oil. And when they abandoned ship, they actually dove into this oil. And if you ever know what it's like to be covered with oil, and he said, we didn't have a lot of clothes on because it was so warm. It was a lot of bedlam, and a lot of the boats, rescue boats, were not released, and many of the guys didn't have their Kapok life jackets, that they wear. But because the ship was moving, everybody didn't abandon ship in the same place. They abandoned ship probably a 3 or 4 mile stretch. They were spread out, and well, he said we made it in the water, and they had a life raft, and he said we'd be picked up in the morning. Morning came and left. That was July 31st. That was a Sunday night going on to Monday. He said the night was very cold because you go into the water, and of course your body gets wet. And of course the sun came up the next day, and he said we were covered with oil, and the sun just absolutely baked us. It was about 80, 90, 100 degrees, and he said we were baking, and nothing for protection, didn't have umbrellas or anything, But they said the next day everything would be fine, they'd be picked up. Well, make a long story short, this went on a day and night for 4 nights. And of course, the worst part about it was that one thing about a shark has senses where they can detect that there's blood in the water for many miles, or they have a sense that they know that there's food somewhere. And he said at night those sharks would come, and it would just murder us. You hear guys screaming because they were being torn apart by sharks. It's a sad story, but it's true, and people don't know that. But if you read the book, The Sinking of the USS Indianapolis, it's all described in there. But of course, having him tell me one-on-one, it was exactly what happened. They were not picked up, and of course they had no water, no food, and they had this hot sun in the daytime and the cold at night. Miraculously, there was a Navy pilot by the name of Gwynn who was flying over that region of the Pacific. Matter of fact, for the first few days, the Navy didn't even miss the USS Indianapolis. Paul Murphy told me they sent an SOS, but apparently it was picked up in the Philippines, but whoever picked it up didn't do anything about it. And they didn't even know where the ship was. This PBY, which is a reconnaissance plane, was flying in the Pacific in the area where the ship was sunk. His antenna was sort of broken or something, and he turned around to look back at it to fix his antenna, and he noticed an oil slick in the water. And he said, well, it must be a submarine that was sunk, and there's oil in the water. I'm going to go down and take a look. So he went down and take a look, and he saw all these guys in the water waving their arms, And that was on Thursday morning. They were sunk Sunday night. He made a pass through where they were floating in the water and came back, and he landed that plane in the ocean, which is definitely against all the rules of flying a PBY. But he said they climbed aboard the PBY, and the PBY immediately radioed ships that were in the area. And there were several destroyers, and the closest one was 300 miles. So before it got there, it was a while. You go full speed, and it takes you a full day, to get that distance. And the destroyers picked these guys out of the water, and they were completely dehydrated, starving. On that ship, there were 1,197 men. 90 officers died. There were 38 Marines and only 6 survived. 317 were picked up from the water. And that was in 1945. The captain, McVeigh, was court-martialed because he didn't zigzag his ship in the waters, and they had the captain of the Japanese submarine testify in Washington, D.C. That's when McVeigh was court-martialed. And of course, McVeigh took this very much to heart. He felt very bad that his crew was lost, and it bothered him so much. In 1967, about 22 years after the ship was sunk, he committed suicide, which was sad. After the war, I went to college and got an education, and I wanted to get a good job. And of course, I got married in 1949. My wife is still living, and we're still together. And of course, that was to raise a family, which was successful. We had 4 children. All 4 of them went to college. All 4 of them are employed and doing well. We have 8 grandchildren. Each of the children has a boy and a girl, and we have 3 great-grandchildren. So my passion, of course, was to take care of my family and see that they did well in life.